Among all the groups mentioned in the Bible, few have a tale as layered with contradiction as the Moabites. They were close neighbors to Israel, yet often stood as their sworn enemies. Though linked by blood through distant ancestry, they repeatedly became a spiritual snare to God's people, always on the edge of Israel's story, always in tension, and yet never entirely absent. To truly understand who the Moabites were, we must return to their origins, a beginning that is far from admirable. It is not a tale of heroes or glory. Rather, it begins in the aftermath of devastation, among ruins and smoke, in shame and sorrow. The birth of this people traces back to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, inside a remote cave filled with fear, despair, and a sin that would echo through generations. It was there, with Lot and his daughters, that a troubled bloodline was formed, one bearing the weight of a painful beginning. This dark origin story profoundly shaped the Moabites' identity. Their uneasy ties with Israel, and their exclusion, under the law of Moses, according to those sacred laws, they were banned from joining the assembly of God's people. In every sense, they were considered outsiders, barred from belonging. And then, something completely unexpected occurs. A Moabite woman, an unlikely and foreign figure, breaks through all barriers meant to keep her out. Not only is she accepted, but she also becomes a crucial part of the lineage of King David. Even more incredibly, she is named in the genealogy of Jesus Christ himself. How could this happen? How could someone from a people marked by rejection become a symbol of divine redemption? Today, we delve into this astonishing journey from a deeply flawed beginning to the significant role the Moabites play in God's eternal plan. Get ready to discover that even when everything seems broken beyond repair, the grace of God continues to write redemptive stories full of unexpected turns. After fleeing the terrifying destruction of Sodom, a city steeped in sin, and judged by fire from heaven, Lot and his daughters sought temporary refuge in the small town of Zoar. But even there, fear clung tightly to them. The cries of the doomed, the scent of smoke, and the memories of fire still haunted their minds like a waking nightmare. Feeling unsafe, they left Zoar and escaped to the mountains, finding shelter in a secluded cave, completely cut off from society. Surrounded by nothing but stone and silence, they faced a grim new reality. They were utterly alone. Everything had been lost: their home, their possessions, the daughters' promised husbands, and most heartbreakingly, Lot's wife, who had turned to a pillar of salt after looking back at the destruction they left behind. In this isolated and grief-stricken setting, a disturbing event unfolded. Lot's daughters, shaped by the corruption and moral decay they had long witnessed in Sodom, began to see the world through a lens clouded by desperation. With hope nearly gone and the fear of losing their family line overwhelming them, they made a decision where fear overpowered conscience. In Genesis chapter 19, the eldest daughter's reasoning is revealed with unsettling clarity. Our father is old, and there is no man left on the earth to come into us after the custom of all the earth. Come, let us give our father wine and lie with him, so that we may preserve our father's seed. To the daughters of Lot, whose understanding of morality had already been warped by years spent in a city where right and wrong were constantly blurred, their actions seemed like the only way forward. In their minds, the world had come to an end. There were no men left, no future for their family unless they acted. Convinced it was their responsibility to preserve their father's lineage, they took a desperate and tragic step. On 2 consecutive nights, they gave Lot wine until he was completely unaware of what was happening. In his intoxicated state, unaware and uncomprehending, he became the father of his own grandchildren. From this act, 2 sons were born, each carrying the weight of their origin. The older daughter named her son Moab, the ancestor of the Moabite people. The younger named her child Ben, who would become the forefather of the Ammonites. Genesis 19:37-38. Unlike the nation of Israel, whose beginnings were grounded in divine promise and a covenant with Abraham, the Moabites came into being through sorrow and moral collapse. Their roots were not blessed but marked by shame, and this would shape how they were viewed for generations to come, especially by their Israelite relatives. Despite this painful beginning, the descendants of Moab multiplied and became a recognized nation. The Moabites established themselves, but their name would forever carry the imprint of a dark legacy. They would go on to play key roles in conflicts, strange alliances, and pivotal biblical events that echoed for centuries. Generations later, after decades of hardship, wandering through the wilderness, facing battles, hunger, and thirst, the people of Israel finally stood at the threshold of the promised land. It was a moment their ancestors had long dreamed of. Yet, just as they approached the land of Canaan, they encountered resistance not from strangers, but from distant relatives. Rather than greeting them with hospitality, the Moabites responded with fear, suspicion, and hostility. This wasn't merely a defensive reaction, it was calculated and dangerous. Scripture tells us that the Moabites tried to undermine Israel in 2 devastating ways. First, through spiritual attack. Second, through moral compromise. In Numbers chapters 22-24, we're introduced to Balak, king of Moab. Seeing the Israelites camped in vast numbers across the plains, he was overcome with dread. With no hope of defeating them in battle, he turned to supernatural means. Balak summoned Balaam, a renowned prophet known for the power of his blessings and curses, and offered him great riches in exchange for casting a curse over Israel. But Balaam, in attempting to obey the king, ran into a divine barrier. On his way to meet Balak, Balaam encountered a bizarre and miraculous event. His donkey, seeing an angel blocking the road, refused to go forward. Then, in an extraordinary moment, the donkey spoke, warning Balaam of the unseen danger ahead. Yes, a donkey spoke with human words, revealing that God was fully in control of the situation. 3 times Balak took Balaam to different high vantage points overlooking Israel's camp, hoping a curse would be pronounced. But every time Balaam opened his mouth, blessings came forth instead. Rather than curses, Balaam declared prophecies of Israel's greatness and divine favor. It was a humiliating failure for Balak, and a vivid reminder that the purposes of God cannot be overturned by human schemes. Yet the story didn't end there. When the attempt to curse Israel failed, a far more subtle and seductive strategy emerged. According to later biblical accounts, it was Balaam himself who suggested a new tactic to the king of Moab. If Israel could not be destroyed through force or enchantment, they could be led into self-destruction through temptation. This marked the beginning of the second offensive. Moabite women, known for their beauty and enticing customs, approached the Israelite men. They invited them to join in their feasts, ceremonies, and idolatrous celebrations. After years of exhaustion, wandering, and struggle, the Israelite men gave in. Weary and vulnerable, they allowed themselves to be drawn into compromise both morally and spiritually. Numbers chapter 25 paints this moment with striking clarity. The Israelites began to engage in illicit relations with Moabite women, joining them not only in their company but in their worship. They took part in meals offered to foreign gods and ultimately bowed before Baal of Peor, a pagan deity. What unfolded was not just a failure of discipline, it was a spiritual collapse. The people chosen and set apart by God, commanded to remain separate from idolatry, walked headfirst into a deadly snare. The response from God was swift and uncompromising. His anger was kindled, and a devastating plague swept through the Israelite camp, claiming the lives of thousands. The nation's holiness had been fractured. The covenant built on faithfulness and obedience was betrayed by lust and idolatry. Amid the disorder and grief, one man rose up. Phinehas, a priest, filled with righteous zeal, took decisive and radical action. He purged the camp of its corruption by confronting the sin head-on. Only after his bold act of purification did the plague come to a halt. But this incident was more than just a tragic misstep in Israel's journey. It revealed a deeper truth. Israel's most dangerous enemy was not always outside the camp with weapons and threats. Sometimes, the greatest threat came from within, hidden in temptation, disguised as pleasure, and wrapped in cultural acceptance. That's what made the Moabites so dangerous. They weren't just political or military adversaries. They embodied spiritual peril, capable of leading God's people away from truth and into ruin. In light of this, a solemn decree was issued, one that would resonate throughout Israel's history. The spiritual treachery of the Moabites, from orchestrating attempts to curse Israel to successfully luring them into sin at Peor, did not pass unnoticed. These were not just memories of emotional pain, they became encoded into divine law. In Deuteronomy 23:2-3, God gives a direct and heavy command through Moses. No Ammonite or Moabite shall enter the assembly of the Lord, even to the 10th generation. None of their descendants shall ever be admitted. These are sobering words. This wasn't a minor exclusion or a temporary cultural ban, it was a complete severance from Israel's spiritual life. To be barred from the assembly of the Lord meant total exclusion from the heart of Israel's worship, community, and covenant blessings. It was, in every way, a sentence of disagreement, and the decree emphasized its permanence, even to the 10th generation, forever. This wasn't merely about vengeance or emotional reaction. The following verse explains the reasoning. Because the Moabites refused to offer Israel food and water on their journey from Egypt, and because they hired Balaam to curse them, God remembered their cold indifference in Israel's hour of need, and their attempt to weaponize the spiritual realm against a people just delivered from bondage. It wasn't simply ingratitude, it was a calculated act of sabotage. While the exclusion might appear harsh at first, from a spiritual perspective, it was an act of protection, not punishment. God wasn't lashing out in fury. He was setting a guardrail to preserve the integrity of the covenant. Israel was to remain holy, untainted by outside influences that could lead them astray. And so, Moab's fate appeared. Sealed, a people born in disgrace, marked by betrayal, and now separated indefinitely by divine decree. From a human point of view, it looked like the story was over. The path to redemption seemed blocked. The door to God permanently closed. Reconciliation seemed unthinkable. Yet God is never confined by human assumptions. His justice is unwavering, but His mercy runs even deeper. Where the world sees rejection, He authors redemption. And it is precisely in this dark, seemingly hopeless landscape that God plants a seed of grace, a story destined to grow in defiance of every expectation. Centuries after the tragic beginnings of the Moabites, during one of the most unstable and spiritually confused eras in Israel's history, the time of the Judges, a new story begins to unfold. One that confronts the very logic of exclusion with a tale of love, loyalty, and divine grace. And at the heart of this story is someone who, by all human standards, should have remained on the outside: a woman, a widow, a foreigner, a Moabite. Her name was Ruth. The book of Ruth opens with a striking irony. A famine grips Bethlehem, ironically named House of Bread, forcing an Israelite family to seek refuge in none other than Moab, the very land cursed and cut off by divine command. The man leading the family, Elimelech, took his wife Naomi and their 2 sons across the border in search of survival. But what they found in Moab was far more than food. They found connection and heartache. The 2 sons married Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. Then tragedy struck. Elimelech died, and in time, both sons also passed away. 3 women, 3 widows left, grieving and vulnerable in a foreign land, with nothing left. Naomi decided to return home to Bethlehem, having heard that the Lord had once again blessed his people and restored bread to the land. But before departing, she made a selfless and loving gesture. She urged her daughters-in-law to stay behind, to return to their families and rebuild their lives. It was a compassionate act, born from a desire to see them happy even if it meant walking back to Bethlehem alone. Orpah moved and in tears, eventually accepted. She kissed Naomi and returned to her people, a choice that was deeply human and understandable. But Ruth chose a different road, one that would change the course of history. She refused to turn back. She refused to let Naomi journey alone. And then came her timeless declaration, words that still stir the soul, found in Ruth 1:16-17. Do not urge me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates me from you. These were not simply kind words from a devoted daughter. They were a covenant, bold, selfless, and transformational. In speaking them, Ruth was relinquishing her identity, her homeland, her cultural heritage, even the God she had once known. She abandoned everything familiar to walk a path of uncertainty. She wasn't compelled or coerced. Her decisions sprang from love for Naomi, and faith in the God of Israel, whose presence she had glimpsed through Naomi's quiet perseverance and grief. Ruth's choice was nothing short of a conversion. It was an act of deep, personal surrender. She wasn't just pledging allegiance to her mother-in-law, she was embracing a people who had every reason to reject her and committing herself to a God who, despite the pain and silence of loss, remained worthy of her trust. In a world where every law and social custom deemed her unworthy, Ruth chose belonging. She chose covenant over comfort, love over security, and faith over fear. Bout with that single, courageous choice, Ruth the Moabite, the one excluded by law, stepped into the story of God's covenant people, not by lineage but by faith, a faith that God could not and would not overlook. And so, side by side, to widows, one, an Israelite scarred by sorrow, the other, a foreigner fueled by devotion and quiet strength, walked together toward Bethlehem. They had no guarantees, no secure future, only hope and loyalty guiding their steps. Yet in that simple act of commitment, God was already crafting a new chapter in his redemptive plan. Ruth's arrival in Bethlehem prompts a profound and uncomfortable question. How could a Moabite woman, someone explicitly banned from joining Israel's assembly, be not only received but become the centerpiece of one of Scripture's most beloved stories? The answer is as unsettling as it is beautiful. Grace. The law of Deuteronomy set boundaries, necessary ones, to guard against the spiritual corruption of idolatrous cultures, but it was never meant to pronounce eternal condemnation on the individual heart. From the beginning, the God of Israel has been a God who looks beyond surface identity and sees the heart. And Ruth's heart was unlike her people's past. It was soft, willing, and fully surrendered. When she declared, "Your people will be my people, and your God, my God," she wasn't just offering companionship. She was making a covenant, choosing with her whole being to leave behind everything she had known, her nation, her customs, her gods, and follow the God of Israel. That choice wasn't just relational, it was spiritual, and God accepted her. In Bethlehem, Ruth's integrity began to speak louder than her foreign status. Her humility, her tireless work, and her unwavering loyalty drew the attention of Boaz, a man of noble character and a relative of Naomi's late husband. According to Israelite custom, there was a sacred role known as the kinsman redeemer, a man responsible for preserving the name and inheritance of a deceased relative. Boaz recognized Ruth's virtue, saw the depth of her faith, and stepped forward to fulfill that role. He did not just take responsibility, he embraced the opportunity to redeem and restore. Boaz married Ruth, giving her not only a home and a future, but a place of honor in Israel. This wasn't just a romantic resolution, it was a divine turning point. Ruth, once an outsider, became part of God's covenant community. More than a story of love between two people, theirs became a living parable of redemption. Ruth represents all of us outsiders, broken people with painful pasts, spiritually homeless. Boaz is a picture of Christ the Redeemer, who sees our worth, steps in on our behalf, and brings us into a new covenant of belonging. Just as Ruth was embraced, not by merit but by grace, we too are welcomed by the boundless mercy of God, mercy that breaks through laws, tears down walls, and rewrites destinies. Perhaps the most astonishing affirmation of Ruth's story appears not in the book that bears her name, but in the opening chapter of the New Testament. The Gospel of Matthew begins with what many might skim over, a genealogy, but woven into that lineage, amid patriarchs and kings, appear for women. This alone is remarkable in a patriarchal context. But even more stunning is the inclusion of Ruth, a Moabite, a foreigner from a people once banned from the assembly of the Lord. Her presence in Jesus' genealogy is not incidental. It's a theological declaration. God's salvation was never meant to be limited to one nation or one people. His love has always reached across boundaries. Ruth's faith, born out of sorrow, shaped by loyalty, and lived in quiet obedience, was so precious to God that he placed her in the very bloodline of the Messiah. Ruth became the great-grandmother of King David, and from David's line came Jesus Christ. It's as if God was saying, yes, I know her past, I know where she came from, and I still chose her. Her story is a reminder that no background is too broken, no outsider too far gone. Through faith and surrender, anyone can become part of the story God is writing, a story not built on perfection, but on grace. Yes, I know the origin of her people, but more importantly, I know the heart that believes. The story that began in disgrace, despair, and exclusion ends in triumph, redemption, and eternal belonging. Grace won. Mercy prevailed. Love had the final word. And now we reach the end of our journey through the story of the Moabites, a tale that begins in a cave, burdened by sin and sorrow, and ends in glory with the arrival of the one who would redeem all of humanity. We've traced the history of a nation born in shame, hardened in pride, and entangled in opposition to God's people, one condemned by law and cast aside. But within that very lineage, God chose someone the world would have overlooked. Not a queen, not a prophet, a widow, a foreigner, a woman with no status, no power, and no earthly reason to be remembered. And yet, through her, God rewrote the ending. The story of Ruth stands as one of the most breathtaking truths in all of Scripture, that the grace of God can break every curse. It transcends every law. It heals every rejection. The sin committed in the hidden darkness of a cave might have defined Moab's beginning, but it did not define its destiny. In a humble barley field beneath the light of morning, a Moabite woman gathered not just grain but redemption. And through that act of faith and obedience, she paved the way for the birth of Jesus Christ, the true Redeemer. God's law is perfect, right, just, and holy. It reveals his nature and the seriousness of sin. But the story of Ruth reveals an even deeper truth. God's heart is irresistibly drawn to those who come to him in humility and genuine faith. Ruth shows us that God doesn't judge based on flags, tribes, or ancestry. He sees the heart. And when a heart turns toward him, no curse, no rejection, no law is strong enough to keep his grace from pouring in and transforming everything. This story teaches us that God doesn't deal with nations as faceless crowds, he sees individuals. His mercy is deeply personal. It's always available to anyone willing to seek him, no matter their past, no matter where they come from. Ruth's journey is a testimony that no one's story is too far gone, and that in the hands of God, even the most broken beginnings can become vessels of hope. Thank you for walking with us through this powerful journey, a story that proves how shame can give way to salvation. The legacy of the Moabites, once marked by darkness, was redeemed through the faith of one woman, and through her, God revealed the far-reaching scope of his salvation plan. If you're inspired and want to dive deeper into stories like this, stories filled with twists, hope, and forgotten truths of Scripture, click on one of the videos now. On your screen, each one offers a new path, a new message, and a fresh revelation that will stir your spirit and deepen your faith. May God bless you richly, and we'll see you in the next journey.